So I want about an arm length of thread, and if I'm going to be threading this, I need to maybe trim, right? So if I have a frayed end, trim it with some sharp scissors, and then I need to thread my needle. Now, the first method would be just to, do it as is like this. It's pretty standard, and I'm threading through the eye of the needle. This can be kind of tricky, though, depending on the size of the eye of your needle and your thread and how easy, you see it. So if this doesn't work for you, no problem. Something else that I've seen done is kind of this like crease and loop. So I'm going to wrap just a little tail end over my needle and hold it tight and pull it off of the needle to kind of like crease that thread end and create a really tight loop. And then I'm actually holding that tightly, going to thread that through the eye of the needle. I find that works a lot better because then I'm not actually having any tail ends that are going to fray. So now I want to double my thread up. I prefer to work with a doubled thread for like most standard sewing. It just gives me a little bit more strength and a few more options in terms of like knotting. So I'm going to double them up, and there's two ways to knot them that I use. One would be to lay my thread over my needle and double loop it over the actual needle itself, twisting it. I then hold this tight on the needle and then pull my thread through, and that's going to naturally make a knot. It's pretty nifty. But the other option would be kind of a standard overhand knot. This works just as well too. It's a little bit more of a personal preference. Now, when you're working with a needle and thread, your needles are pretty small, so please make sure you don't lose them. So either tuck it into your sewing kit, or if you're actually actively sewing, just add it to the end of your fabric. So let's talk briefly about what kind of fabric we're working with. It's called woven fabric, and that means that there are kind of two different directional weaves, so crossing over, and you can actually tear along this grain. So I can snip a little edge in here and tear it. It will leave it kind of frayed, so make sure that you're tearing about a ½ inch above where you actually want your piece to be, and then this is nice for creating long strips. So I want to practice my stitches. So we're going to prepare for that with a long strip about 2 inches wide and maybe 7 or 8 inches long, folded over. I'm going to practice a running stitch first. So what is a running stitch? Its name kind of implies that it's a running along. And if we think about it in more 3 dimensions, it's going, up and then down and under, up and down and then under. So it's kind of like this wave form. So you might want to draw on your practice piece a line in pencil and to work with. So I want to anchor my first stitch in place. I don't rely on the knot at the end because it can pull through, especially an open weave. So I open up that thread that is tied so that I can catch it through my needle and then tighten that up. And notice I'm working a ½ inch or so from the edge, and that's important so I don't get it fraying. Now I'm right-handed, so I'm working from right to left. It's really whatever's your preference. And so for my running stitch, I'm literally just weaving, kind of tucking under and over. And I can do this for a few lengths. I don't have to go one at a time necessarily. I can just kind of gather it up on my needle, then pull it through. Please make sure you're catching both layers. I think that's one reason why it's important to practice on a 2-layer piece of fabric, because if you don't get into the habit of that, then oh no, you might do a whole line of stitches and realize you didn't really catch and actually do the job of securing your fabric together. Now, as I was working here, I actually got a little bit of a knot. That does happen sometimes, and most often I can actually unpick that with my needle. So just know that that might need to happen on occasion, or if it's something not too big of a deal, you can always just leave it and keep going. Kind of depends on what you're working on. All right, so as I get to the end here, even for practice, it's important to practice how we finish. So I'm going to secure the end by, similar to how that one of those tying methods, I'm going to loop my thread twice around my needle, hold that in place, and then pull my needle through to make that end knot. And when I cut my thread, I always want to cut about a ½ inch away from the knot. So then a backstitch is similar to a running stitch, but it's a lot more secure because I'm doubling up my thread. So I'm going back over, right? So I go under and I loop around each time, back over. So it's going to start the same as my running stitch. I'm going to anchor my thread And I'm even going to start with just this kind of standard stitch, kind of loop, catch one bit. But then instead of continuing forward, I'm going to go back into that last kind of exit down here, go under and come out a little further ahead of that last area. I don't know how you want to describe that. And then I'm going to kind of repeat that. So back through that last stitch, under and out a bit further ahead. And so that's my back stitch. So I think it's really helpful to practice these stitches, especially if you're really new to sewing. So grab a strip of fabric and go, make it about a 3-inch or 4-inch practice strip for both techniques.